podcast.
That's right.
He travels the world running concerts and searches for the best coffee, people, and amazing stories so you don't have to.
Pay attention, you're going to learn something for a change.
This is a show about all of those things and much, much more.
You're blowing my mind right now. I hope someone's recording this.
So settle in, pour a cup of amazing coffee. He's a coffee snob, by the way. Crank that ghetto blaster and enjoy the 150,000 ranked podcast in the land.
Fake laugh, hiding real pain.
I think that's an exaggeration. It's the Brenton on Tour podcast.
Any question?
Here's BD.
Welcome back, friends. It is the Brenton on Tour podcast, Sober on Tour series that I started last week, talking about being sober on tour, the people that might be on tour that had made a change, that cleaned up their life, or just decided not to drink, or whatever it is that's getting them by. This new world that has put us back on tour. A lot of changes have happened to a lot of people. They've been off for 2 years, sitting at home alone, going, maybe I'm done drinking. Maybe I'm done with all the excess. And it's created a whole bunch of new people out on tour for the first time that are doing it sober for the first time. So I thought it'd be an interesting series to dive into how people are getting around and doing that. My guest this week is a friend of the show, been on a few times. It's been on the Kids on the Escalator podcast a few times with me. Plays with Slash, plays with Toque, plays with everybody. Good friend of mine, good friend of yours. That's Todd Kerns. How are you, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really good, man. I'm hanging out in Quebec City. Just had some of the best coffee I've had all year here in this fantastic place. It's amazing. It's amazing.
There would be some great coffee up there, my friend. That's awesome.
I love this city. The city's so European. It's so vibrant. It's great. I just love walking around, you know?
It's the closest you'll get to the European vibe in North America right there where you are. Totally.
Absolutely. And I think it's a little hidden gem that this country of ours is not totally aware of. If you haven't come there, you definitely need to do that. Now,
Agreed.
This series is about being sober on tour. I like to tell this story about the first time I went to Vegas and when I met Brent Fitz and your bandmates, and went to Vegas and he was sober. And I'm like, can I do Vegas sober? So I went down and, did the weekend with him sober. And then I come back and our mutual old friend, Christy Lobman, was like, hey, you should go see Todd play. I'm like, man, I haven't seen Todd since I did shows for Age of Electric for years. So she puts us together. I come down and see you play at the Rio.
That's right.
And then you're like, hey, we're doing the Adult Video Awards after show.
I forgot about that one.
Well, that should be good. That should be good to just have a nice little lovely chat and hangout. And it's Vegas, so let's go. So I go to the Rio, watch you play. I go to the Adult Video Awards. Vinnie Paul's there. It's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Every single scenario that at that point I had met you at involved a substantial amount of alcohol. And here we are watching you, and you don't drink. And I'm like, there's another guy that doesn't drink. And I'm like, how is this even possible? Not to mention you leave, and then we get invited with our friend Frank to the late Vinnie Paul's house.
That's right. Yeah.
Which again was a whole, it's Vegas. It's the whole thing. And I remember talking to you the next day, and I was like, thanks for having me out. And he goes, you made it to Vinnie's. And I was like, but you weren't there, but he was watching videos of you playing the show that you guys had just played. It was this weird kind of thing, And
That's very Vinny.
It got me. It started this kind of thought for me about Brent doesn't drink and Todd doesn't drink, and these guys are in, Slash's band. Well, at that point, I don't think you were in Slash's band, but it was coming.
No.
And I was just like, geez, how are these guys doing this? And it kind of started this thing in my brain about, is it possible to do this, without drinking copious amounts of alcohol and all the rest of it. So I thought I better start this series out with you being a guest, and we can talk a little bit about it. But welcome back to the show. It's been a while. Great to see you. And thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here. It's funny that to bring it up, because it seems such a, because it's just always kind of been this way to me in a lot of ways. So it's so interesting to have that conversation, especially like the going to Vegas, not having drinks. I mean, going to Vinny's house is, that's the epicenter of of the good time that everybody was having. But
Yeah.
I think even when I was younger, I went through phases of like, growing up in small town Canada, it was just, that's what you did. And then I think there was a certain amount of focus on being a vocalist, whether I'm the main vocalist or the backing vocalist in whatever situation. The actual like landing in Vegas and then playing like sometimes 5 nights a week, I just sort of said to myself, it might be a bit of a vanity thing where you thought to yourself, I just don't want to be, too many drinks in and have people kind of go, whoa, what was up with that? It's kind of, or just kind of, or that, Wednesday night was rough, or whatever, like that kind of thing. I kind of treat the stage very much like an athlete, like I feel like, I'm going out there to win, and I don't want to, I know sometimes it's like, in some situations you're playing cover songs, in playing Rebel Yell by Billy Idol or whatever. But at the same time, I still try to treat it like, look, I want this to be great, and I want to be at my best. So that kind of stuff came into play even back in the Age of Electric days. I was still kind of like, went through phases, but at the same time, I still entertained the whole thing. Do you know what I mean?
Were you a drinker going into Vegas? Like, or what was your drinking? What was your drinking career consisting of at that point? Growing up in Lanigan and growing up in Saskatchewan, it's kind of like it's the push on of like, let's get it to $1.50 highball night and see what goes on, But
dude, I remember playing at the zoo in Winnipeg once, and it was 60 cents for a glass of draft, and and then the audience is sending up beer. You know what I mean? This is like in 89, 90, something like that. And the stage would just be littered with empty glasses, and you would feel like garbage. And I think that, I was so fragile that way. It's kind of like when people would like, get hungover and be able to kind of pull through. I would sometimes get laid right out. And it really had that effect on me that I sort of ended up treating it as sort of like, I just, my bounce back was not like everybody else's. Like I felt like for whatever reason, when it hit me hard. So coming to Vegas, like you say, yeah, I was still drinking, but I wasn't really like it's funny because we talked about this before. You and I have talked about this before, how I wasn't a rehabbed, all kinds of crazy stories with DUIs and all that kind of stuff. No, in fact, I was kind of like, a lot of my friends either remember me as always sober, or some of my friends remember me as just always drinking. It's like sort of like, depends on which chapter you were living through. But it was, when we were younger, and growing up where we grew up, it was just, that's what you did. You just, oh, cool. And you get to that point where you can actually ask for alcohol in your rider, like, which was just usually something as super tame as like a 24 or 12 pack of Molson Canadian. My brother was like the drinking guy. So that was what was on the rider, was Molson Canadian. Like not even like, we can get like, Jägermeister or Dom Perignon if we want to get, or whatever you want. But it's like, no, we're just a bunch of Canadian dudes. Just give us some Labatt Blue or whatever. And, but, and it was funny because I used to tell these stories, and I tell them still, actually, like, even on the road just recently, I was sort of like, this is the period where everybody starts drinking. Sound check is over, and then you're just sitting there waiting to play. And that's when everybody falls into a bottle, because it's like you're sitting there, you eat some food, it depends on the level of success you're facing. Because sometimes, let's head out and get something to eat is a whole other hassle. And you just, and they're feeding you at the venue. So you just sit there in this dressing room for several hours. And it's like, whether you've been drinking the night before, which is usually the case. And then you're like, well, I'll just have one to kind of, level this out. And then it turns into another one. By the time you get on stage, you're feeling good, and then you're drinking through the set, drinking after the set, and it just turns into a party. It's just this, and it's a cycle, you know what I mean? And especially if you're like, passing out at wherever, and then you got to get to the next town. Because we used to always laugh about that too, because it was like back in the early days when you're driving yourself from town to town. It's your turn to drive tonight, drummer or whoever. And
always the drummer, by the way.
Inevitably, whoever was supposed to be driving would somehow have fallen into like 60-cent draft night, and then and you're like, well, now what? And now we sit and drink at Robin's Donuts or Tim Hortons if you're living high, drink coffee for 4 hours waiting for everybody to kind of get to a point where we can drive to the next town. But and that's sort of just young, kids just playing music. And I think once I kind of got to that point where I felt like I said, I didn't have that sort of like, I'm like anybody, I made all kinds of, no one makes great decisions. I mean, I admittedly have made terrible decisions in that kind of situation. So, but once you kind of put your head in that space where it wasn't for me. And it's a weird thing to say, because when I say that, it's kind of like, it just kind of felt like I just could never find, well, I'll drink this. I'll never forget.
Never found your dose. Never found your proper dose.
I remember Kurt Dahl from Age of Electric. Let's throw him under the bus.
Sure.
He was I can't remember if it was his birthday or what, but I remember him saying like, I'm not drinking beer anymore. I'm drinking the scotch. I'm getting too fat on the beer. And I was kind of like, okay, it's like, why? It just seemed like a very sort of like, this is what I'm doing now. I'm putting my foot down. You're kind of okay. And I remember Zucker Baby was opening for us. Those guys.
So I would have promoted that tour, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
These are the tours where I first met you. Was that
exactly like it was a big deal for us, because things were kind of going great, and Zucker Baby are our best friends, and they're opening for us. It was just like go across the country pillaging. And I remember Kurt, he's sort of like, I'm not drinking beer anymore, I'm drinking scotch. And I remember, okay, whatever. And we go on stage and we play, and it was like, the drummer is the whole anchor of the thing, and you feel like, whoa, what's going on back here? Missing cymbals. And I turn around and I look at him, and he just looks at me, and it's loud. It's like, he looks at me and just kind of words, I'm fucked up. And I go, great. It's like song 2, I mean, like we still got like 90 minutes to go or something. And I remember him looking over at Reed Shimizawa, Reed from Zucker Baby. It was a dear friend of ours. We've known him for 100 years. And he goes, and he looks over at Reed and he goes, am I playing okay? And Reed just goes, and it was like, fuck you. He's kind of, but it was like, it was always that balancing act for everybody. And I think I just got to a point where I just kind of like, it didn't feel great going on stage and knowing I wasn't playing my best. And I think that some people can, like the Bon Scotts of the world would have, whiskey and a cigarette and go out and sing like Bon Scott. And then, but I knew that I didn't have that kind of constitution. I was sort of more like, no, you got to take care of yourself. You got to get there. I mean, a lot of guys, like, oddly enough, like Roger Daltrey and stuff like that, I always heard was very sort of like he was really took care of himself because of his voice. The other guys were not,
It's
so
funny. It's funny about that, because
story.
the singing thing is more important than anything. However, I am going to go back and clip the part where you said it's all about the drummer. So I'm just going to clip that and put that up, because that's for my drummer buddies. Hey Fitz, hey every other drummer that's been shit on forever. But anyways,
I didn't.
I'm going to go back.
Quite so.
I'm going to go back and clip
aggressive.
that. But yeah, so the from the voice side of things, there's probably a spot, all egos aside. There's singers, and then there's singers. There's the guy that where you put the band together and you go, you sing. Yeah, sure. Right. And then the other guy goes, you're just okay. Maybe you try to sing. Okay. You sing. Okay. We're going to go with that. And, some bands have come out of that. Like, wow, that's great. But at some point you probably would have realized you had a pretty special gift there. Because for those listening, and I'll pad the ego here for a minute. Todd's got one of the greatest rock voices.
You
really?
That's the only reason I came on here.
Really. But it's just a fantastic how you've been able to maintain it, right? And just over this time, and you're banging out the gun stuff on Slash's things, and you're just having to stay at that register, and so it's certainly a point where you would have realized that you have a gift, and some people choose to treat that gift with respect, and other people just decide to blow it out. So there had to have been a point there where you were like, this is probably my livelihood here. I would imagine that would have played a role here.
Yeah, it is. And like I said before, it probably was a certain degree of vanity where I was like, I don't want to go up here and be like, oh, sorry, I was wasted, and I'm sorry I sucked tonight. It's like, I mean, Miles Kennedy, I've been touring with him for 12 years and he lives like a monk on the road. He drinks, like but he doesn't on the road. Like he literally like lives in this sort of like, monk life because he's like always terrified of, and he's been through it all. He's been doing this a million years. So he's had every terrible experience you can have. That said, I mean, then you look at bands like the Replacements, it's like the Paul Westerberg and those guys are just like, they just drank all the time. They're not, Paul was never Freddie Mercury, he was like that. He sang the way he sang. And that's sort of like that. You can have a drink and do that. But I mean, that said, I mean, like Sebastian Bach's, he likes to have a drink. That's just who he is. And he still sings like Sebastian Bach. That's a pretty high bar for him to be going out and doing night after night after night. But I think that, like I said before, I think some people just have the constitution that they can kind of do that and still go out there and do that. And like, I always say when we were kids, it was like we wanted to be Bon Scott or Brian Johnson or any of those kind of really, that dude from Nazareth, and like I want to go out there and sing like that, and it's like you kind of forget that that's just the way those guys sing. They weren't really putting that on. That's just how they sang. The rest of us were killing ourselves trying to sing like that. And once you kind of become comfortable with what you do and sort of figure out how to do it, then it's more up to you to decide, well, am I going to do this? Am I going to be able to do this, 5 nights a week sometimes? And that's where it really comes down to, like, Freddie Mercury drank, Freddie Mercury smoked, but that's just the way he had that voice, and it's just the way he sang. I'm sure he had rough nights. I've never really seen footage of Freddie just sucking, but it's just part of the thing. It's the same, like I said before, it's like if I had to go and run a marathon, I probably would, not to equate going up and singing rock songs as some sort of major physical or athletic kind of thing, but it is true. It's sort of like I don't want to imagine, like, if I was going to go do any of those things, that I should have a few drinks first. Although Slash tells me great stories of how him and Duff would get wasted and then go to the gym and then still be drinking at the gym in the hotel. And I'm like, what? He goes, oh yeah, we just hammered, like, just bottles of vodka and like get on the treadmill. And I'm like, oh my God. He goes, yeah, but those are guys that, like, those guys made all of us look like chumps when it came to that.
Well, that's I had a thing I was talking to Dean about a couple months ago when I had him on the show, and there's ones that do it well, and then there's ones that fail at it. And so in my 100%. Particular case, like, I've stopped because, similar, like, I have recognizing where my career trajectory was going, but also like, I'm doing, this tour is like 24 hours on, 24 hours off. It doesn't lend itself to, okay, show's done, let's go have a couple and then try to roll in at 6 a.m. It just doesn't work. And so there's a point where you kind of have to do that. So there's some that do it well and are career successful drinkers, and then there's ones that quit and then feel like you failed at drinking. So that's kind of, I was like, damn it, there's something else I failed at. But anyway, so as you go through and you join, friends with Duff or Slash, and you go through the years and you meet all these different people. So one of the questions I had for you was sort of like, what musicians surprised you when you found out that they were sober? You come into this situation and you go, what? You? Yeah. I didn't know that. Like, so who surprised you in that regard?
I think that, in a lot of ways, I don't know if it's so much surprising as that Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley were always very sort of rock solid. I think that we sort of, it's not really a surprise because we knew that our whole lives, but Gene will sort of, be like, I never drank. I never had a drink my entire life. I've never been drunk my entire life. And you go, wow, well, that's surprising. It's one thing to know that someone's sober, you assume because, they had some bad experiences or whatever and just landed there. But, that's kind of surprising. It's different being in a world with guys like, I know Duff and Slash and Steven Adler, the three guys that nearly, who really went, the full distance of marathon partying. We're talking like, Strokes and Duff with the pancreas or whatever the hell it was, and then Slash with the heart stuff. It's like these are all guys that, they had to have that line drawn where it was kind of like, well, if you keep drinking, this is what's going to happen, and that's a very serious sort of like, okay, well, that's it. And you really kind of, and not just rock stars, there are regular people who have had to hit that wall where it's like, if you keep drinking, you're going to die. You know what I mean? And a lot of people just can't. They can't stop, and they don't make it. That's just the way it goes.
I keep hearing those stories about a boot. There's my Canadian coming in.
Yeah,
I keep hearing the stories about, like, speaking of Sebastian, where Gene had come up to him and was like, "What are you doing?" And Sebastian was like, "Come on, man." And I'm like, yeah, it must have been, it's like, come on, I don't want to hear this. I'm out, and it's funny because when I read his book, and, my first concert, real rock concert that I went to was Monsters of Rock. And that was, Metallica, Aerosmith, Warrant, and the Black Crowes.
Okay. Yeah.
So I go, and, and at that point I'm into that.
Is this like sober Aerosmith by this point? This would be like,
it would have been on Pump. So
out
of
in the thick of it for their sobriety, at least
maybe
supposedly
89, 88. So maybe out of Permanent Vacation, but
okay,
maybe Pump hadn't quite hit yet, or it was on the way, but it was sort of part of that whole thing. It was Warrants, like, whatever, they were part of it, and they were known for that. But it was Black Crowes' first show in Toronto. And I just remember being like, this is the best thing ever. And then, so I thought to myself, that was, a great first show. And then I read Sebastian's book about what was going on backstage. And I didn't realize everyone was in town. Like every single, like Bon Jovi and Motley Crue, all these guys were just hanging out backstage while we were watching this at the front. And I can only, like, the 80s and the debauchery, and oh my God, like, it's just like, and these guys, a lot of them have made it through, which is great. Some of them haven't, sadly, but there's that sort of like there, and it's this, and it's the rock this, and you're going to get wasted, and that's rock and roll and all the rest of it. But then you get these other stories like Derek from Sum 41 that was like, he's got to shut it down or he's going to die. Other guys that go through it. So I definitely, it's been, especially touring and traveling as much as we do, in the late nights and the early mornings and the rest of it. I'm always fascinated by people that chose to do it sober. I'm not as fascinated as when I was younger, but people that were partying and also pulling that off, because that was the, look at what's happening on stage. They're all wasted and having a great time. And you're like, that's what I want to do. And now I'm like, now I just want to nap, and I can't wait for that.
I know, that's exactly. I mean, that's the reality of it, unfortunately, is that people don't understand the endurance that not only being on stage for 90 minutes or 2 hours or whatever it is, it's the actual endurance of the other 22 hours of the day. Are just as vital. I mean, it's like you just can't imagine the marathon that it really is. I mean, to me, it's always really shocking when you think of how many people we've lost over the years to shenanigans, that every member of Motley Crue is still with us. You know what I mean? Every member of the original Guns N' Roses is still with us. And those guys, they sort of set the precedent. You know what I mean? Like, I think they probably made the every other band look like just they were, oh, those guys, they hang out, they party. But those guys are dangerous, you know what I mean? And I think that's, and many members of all those bands, both of those bands especially, some are sober, some are still struggling in their own way, I assume. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But, I it's such an individualized thing. I mean, like, I always think, because we travel the world all the time, and I always wonder what constitutes alcoholism in the United Kingdom. It's like, like my friends, it's like, having a pint at lunch or just in the day, having pints throughout the day is super normal. But I think there is something to be said about, like, being able to handle your stuff. And I suppose a drinking problem is when you don't show up for work or you just, whatever. I mean, on top of everything else, as grown men like you and I with children and all that kind of stuff too, there's also the other side of it where there's a personal life that you have to maintain. And, going on the road it always seems like it's a big party and we're going to do, and then you realize that it's actually really challenging, and it's challenging to keep your energy up, keep getting up there every night. I mean, it's different in your position more so than mine, but at the same time, it's just as challenging in your position because you have a million people to answer to. You have a million things that you need to do to make it all kind of work. And I think that it's kind of easier when you imagine just the bass player gets up on stage, plays for 2 hours, and then goes backstage and drinks himself blind. That's in reality, like in being on the road as a young man and seeing, like, everybody drank, everybody partied. It was just kind of like the idea of being sober was almost kind of weird, but
there's quite a lot of stigma. There's stigma around it still, but it's more accepted now. And definitely when I decided to not, like, I'm 3 years in, but when I decided to not and started trying, not necessarily to find the people on tour that were sober, but I just chose to take a different approach to touring, and again, there's no swinging off the chandelier stories. It's like end of the day, 15-hour day, you have a couple of drinks on the bus. Next day, couple of drinks on the bus. Next
I remember
day,
Chris Jericho telling me in the wrestling community, he was almost suspicious if you weren't drinking. It's
right.
Kind of like you're are you a narc? Are you this guy staying sober so you're not participating in the shenanigans that, so you're kind of like,
we can't trust that guy or girl because they're not in the club. That's just peer pressure 101. That's just like, everyone submitting to, oh man, like, you travel to get that dream of being in a band, and then you say open, you open for your favorite band, and then that band wants to have a drink, and then you're like, but I don't really drink. There was a point where they're like, fuck you. Now it's kind of like, whatever. When did I hear a story from the other day? There was kind of like, where it was like, you take a drink with the band or you leave the band.
Right.
And it's like, well, then I'm out,
I'm probably not going to survive in that band. It's just kind of like, I probably just wouldn't be interested in being in that scenario. Cause I've never really experienced that, frankly. Like, it's like, I remember reading this thing with Moby one time, of all people. Moby was like having some drinks and enjoying himself because he was successful. And he said, in the Hollywood scene, you go to the party and Dave Navarro's got a Diet Pepsi. The whole Hollywood scene was dudes who had like survived and come out the other side, Flea, all those dudes. And we're talking like hardcore junkies who, it's like, this is what I have to do to survive and to maintain the longevity in this career. And it is true. It's true. Like you kind of, in the music community, you see a lot of sober dudes, and it's just, or and more so an idea of guys who've been around and they've seen it all. And it's sort of like, I remember when I was younger, I remember like saying to this older friend of ours in the business, saying like, hey, we're going out tonight. We're going to go do this and we're going to do that. Then we're going to hit this club. We're going to do that. And I remember him just looking at me going like, I'm good. He goes, I've been out, and I'm that guy now. Like, I kind of like, there's nothing you can literally tell me that you're going to do tonight that I've not experienced or seen or been through.
Sure.
So it's kind of, and I'm like, and none of it is interesting to me. It's like, you're not single. So you're not like out chatting up the ladies and all that kind of stuff. So it becomes kind of like, the whole thing becomes kind of, well, what are we doing? It's like, I want to go play music.
Sleep.
Sure.
Losing sleep. And if you lose sleep, you can't sing, and that's show over. And then that costs money, and that costs reputation. And then, amongst a lot of people, that people forget that like everyone's watching. There's a good point that I had learned along the way, like when I was reading a book about it, and I had read this great line where, the author was talking about how she was like, and we were all partying all the time and everything was great. And she goes, then I realized that I'm the one that was partying and everyone else was just either trying to appease me or whatever. And that kind of, that's into the same thing where you're pouring drinks. And then I look back on my drinking career and I go, yeah, I think I was a drink pour guy.
Were we partying or was I partying?
Was I partying? Yeah. So you're like, uh-oh. Then you're like, there's a bit of I'm like, right.
Yeah.
And then, because then you leave and then people are like, fucking Donnelly last night. Christ. Like, or whatever. You just, it's the whole thing. And again, I don't have any of those swinging off the chandelier stories. It was just, for me, it's one of those, like, you just recognize that maybe man, maybe there's just too much happening here. Like I'm every day after a show, you're just not having 7, you're having 1 or 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But you're on the road.
Yeah.
For 200 days a year. So that's 200 drinks times maybe 2, which is 400 drinks times 10 years on tour. Then you're like, the math.
I know.
There's that math. And then
Yeah.
you're like, and you can care to pay attention to that math or not.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
I chose to pay attention to the math.
So, and then the other side of it too is, as you're getting older, as you're getting to be a grown ass man, sometimes you take a hard look at, the people who still live the way you used to live around you, and you go, God damn, dude, like I don't know how you're doing this, because the bounce back, no matter who you are, no matter how much you partake, the bounce back is not what it used to be. You watch guys just kind of like crippled by their own actions, and often they look 10 years older than you do because they're living hard. You know what I mean?
Todd's 36, by the way, if you can tell.
yeah, hardly. But I mean, it's one of those things where you just, and it's such an individualized thing too. I've never been the kind of person that sits there and goes and judges because someone's having a drink. I honestly don't care. Like I honestly don't. If that's what you want to do, that's great. It's like I always felt kind of, it's sort of like you get inside your own head sometimes with guys like Vinnie Paul or whoever, because Vinnie was like life of the party, and when you saw him, that was just the beginning of his evening, because it's like it's going to go on until it all ends up back at his house, and it's a whole thing, and there's he's just the center of this gigantic thing that just follows him around, and I could only get so close to Vin, because and I felt like I was very close to him. I felt like we really had a great friendship and really loved each other, but because I was not, let's go back to your place and just like drink bottles of Jägermeister till 6 a.m. That chapter I'm not involved in that chapter, so it always kind of felt a little bit kind of like, I wouldn't say I felt bad about it, but there is that kind of like, well, you're only going to get so close to somebody if you don't, just partake in that whole other thing that goes on.
And that's in everything. That's sports.
Yeah.
That's not just music.
Of course.
That's bankers. That's Wall Street.
Yeah.
It's like we're all going for drinks after a day trade on Wall Street. We're all going down to the local pub, and you see it in every movie, and all the stock guys are getting wasted. It's like, if you're not there, A, you're missing information, and B, you're the guy.
You separated yourself, and
you've
nobody should be separated. Yeah. Separated from the herd.
That's still a problem. I think I think it's getting better now, because especially out of COVID and all the rest of it, people's mental health took a real blaming COVID for it. But I definitely have spoken to some people since then that are like, 2 years home.
Yeah.
I couldn't, and they got better. So, that's how do you maintain? Like, so the question to you, like, how do you maintain your sobriety from the standpoint of, like, you say you don't really have an interest in it. For me, I'm over the hump. Every now and again, there'll be a creep in of like, maybe, but then I bury it. So how do you maintain it?
I mean, I'm the kind of guy that honestly, I could have, a glass of wine, and it would be like, whatever, I'd be like, okay, I probably wouldn't even finish the full glass. I'd probably like a few sips of, because I actually really, I've always appreciated that whole world. Mm-hmm. But even then, like you say, it's like if it comes up, first of all, I'm not the kind of guy that goes like, yeah, let's, I always see in movies, I was saying to my wife the other day, you see in a movie, a guy walks into a bar, sits at the bar, orders a drink, starts talking to that guy. I go, I've never done that in my life. It just never entered my.
Somebody put it in a movie once, and that's it.
Yeah,
everyone does it. Oh, guy walks in alone to a bar and talks to the other guy.
And just sits down and then something wackiness ensues. But I've never ever done that, or even thought like anything was missing from my life that I didn't do that. But like I say, the sobriety thing for me is and I think it's one of those things for me that it's like I don't really think about it. Like, it really never fazed me. I never really. I think even in, like, when you were saying about like playing in the Sinners here in Vegas, there were some guys that were like major league Las Vegas barfly guys, where our night, playing a set was just sort of chapter one of their evening. Then after that, they were going out and they would just do the whole, because Vegas doesn't close. So you could just go all night, and they would just kind of have this whole experience. But we could still look at each other and love one another and kind of go like, so I'm going to go home and watch, The Sopranos, and that guy's going to go out and just tear it up, and you're like, that's cool. It's like I just never really. I think because once you've been through it enough times and you've felt as bad as you can feel from either like bad decisions or physically feel bad because of what you've done to yourself. I think I just got to a point where I kind of like, if there was a checklist of like, it was all checked, all the boxes were checked, and I was kind of like folded up and put it away. It's like, that's done. Like, I don't really need to do that anymore. So for me, it's never really like a thing that I need to have long talks with myself about that or whatever. Like, it's like I just kind of, it doesn't really enter my brain. And I've never really noticed it with Brent. I mean, in the Slash camp, which is funny because Frank Sidoris, who's 20 years younger than us, is a young kid. He's 23 years old on the road with us. He's like 30 something now, but he came out with us, and I remember looking at him just feeling kind of bad. Like, it's a shame that this is your first big kind of like.
You grew up in Vegas. Jeez. He was probably going into that bus going, yeah, you guys tell your little stories. I've been here for 20 years,
Exactly, yeah. But he might have, had more fun experiencing that kind of like, I'm 23 years old, getting on a bus, and we're just going to, pirate our way across the country and across the world. But with us, it was just kind of like all these old vet, been there, done that, and there's nothing you're going to do that Slash isn't going to be like, this, everything is white belt compared to his 6th degree black belt of experiences, it's like, you could tell a story, and then his story will just be like, it'll dunk yours every time. Like, you just kind of, oh, okay, well, in the underbelly of Hollywood, drug stories or whatever, you're like, oh boy,
Yeah, it's something when you cross over the hump. I find once you get over the hump, and that's the biggest thing that people ask me about not drinking or anything. They're like, well, how do you do it? And I'm like, well, you got to get over that. You got to remove. Well, everyone has their own journey, so. People are using it to cope, or people are using it to do whatever. But if you remove it, and the association of it with a good time, which is really tough to do from a small town kid from Saskatchewan or Ontario, where it's like snowmobiling and Scuttlebutt Lodge, and it's like everyone's got a Labatt 50, even
you're right. It's like even like when like we're gonna go play golf. I don't play golf, but I'm saying like all my friends that go and play golf, the golf is just part of it. It's the drinking that is happening with your friends on the golf course. And I go like, well, that's a whole other experience then. If you take away the drinking, what is it?
I have a funny story because years ago I was with a friend of mine, and they've been married like, I don't know, 20 years or whatever it was. He's in his 50s and stuff like that, and we were going to go golfing. And so we're at the house, and he's like, he says, all right, we're going to go golfing or whatever. And she goes, and his wife's like, what time will you be back? And, just as like they're planning the afternoon. And I will yell at him, like, just a couple hours. We're just going to bang out 18. And then she yells out, couple hours. And she yells over at him. She goes, why are you gone for 8 hours or 10 hours every time you go golfing? And he just glares at me like, you screwed it up. Like, that's my drinking vacation. And it was so funny. And
exactly.
Like, oh, yeah. And I was drinking at the time. Whoops.
The next time he goes to play golf, it's going to be like, so you're only going to be a couple hours, right? Brent, you're going to play the Donnelly round, or you're going to play
that's right. Needless to say, we didn't golf again.
So no, you're right.
Stuff.
And I think that when you don't drink, I'm always surprised what is used as it's Flag Day, we got to go drinking, or whatever. It's like Cinco de Mayo, and you're like, what are you talking about? We don't celebrate Cinco de Mayo, but but they're having cheap drinks down, and you're like, okay, so everything is about drinking, and you just realize that like when you take that away, you're like, I'm good. I mean,
life gets a little like, so I get that question, like, what surprised you the most about sobriety? And for me, it's like that, just what you just said. It's like every excuse you could throw in. It's like, what's coming up? Well, there's Johnson Rod Day,
Johnson Rod. Yeah.
We better get a holiday,
we better get a 2-4 because it's going to be Johnson Rod on Sunday. So you're like, okay. And you're
what
like,
does that mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean you don't know?
What's the really interesting part for me was, having been like, single, and meeting somebody who also is sober. You know what I mean? I mean, she's like me, where it's kind of like she's not sober because she, has some sort of terrible past. She just kind of like, it's just not her thing, but it doesn't mean she can't have a glass of wine or a drink here and there. It's just sort of that thing of, but it has been very, I mean, I know you've been with your wife a long time, but it's kind of like one of those things where, when you're sober and that Venn diagram of the person you're trying to meet, you add in that thing where it's kind of like, well, now now not only are all these other things that you're looking for in a person, but you're also kind of looking for at least somebody who can keep it together. You know what I mean? Because my thing was never like, I need to be with somebody dead sober. It was kind of more like, I just need to be with somebody who's not like, where, like you say, it's Flag Day. We got to get, or whatever. Let's get a 26 of Jack Daniels. You're like,
you know what, though? I mean, and that's a very great point, because there's a lot of people that build it around it. And that's what I'm saying. It's that's the discovery process of like touring the way it was before, where you're landing in Dublin and you've got 2 days off and you plan around it. So it's like, well, we got to hit the Jameson plant and you got to hit the Guinness plant, and then we'll see the city. Now it's kind of like the other way. I remember, because I made really good friends with the Jameson guys. As a drinker, you're like, there's my Daytona 500. Right. So I've made it as a drinker. I Jameson people are on speed dial. And when I brought a band in and told them I didn't drink anymore, it was like, I might as well have been wearing a MAGA hat. Like it was just like they were just
put on the scarlet letter. Yeah. Like sober.
Better
go
out of here. You don't want your kind. You don't need your kind. They were amazing and great and everything. But it was just like the look on their face was like, what? So funny how it changes. But hey, whatever. And the point of this series is not to discount drinking. Certainly a lot of fun. The point of this series is like, if you've chosen to take this, how did you do it? Why did you do it? And is it working for you? And that's really this discussion. And also telling people that it is possible to live a rock and roll life and be in a rock and roll band and tour the world and do the rest of it and do it with club soda and lime. I mean, that's my discovery.
Yeah. And honestly, like I said before, it's like I travel in circles where it's predominantly, and not predominantly at all. Like I played in plenty of situations where people are drinking, and I'm always almost kind of half surprised. It's kind of like when I go, oh right, you guys still do this. It's like most of us who've sort of lived the full experience are kind of like, I'm good. Like I just can't do it anymore. But it really doesn't faze me at all. Like I've never really been too bothered with whether people drink or don't drink, and no one's ever sort of. I've never really felt like I've gotten that kind of shifty eye thing of like, well, what's your deal? Like it's just kind of like, it's just what I do, and it doesn't really faze me. And I'm same way. I don't really care what you do. If you can show up and do the gig and be solid, whether you've had a few drinks or not, it's totally fine. I'm always surprised how many people I know who've gotten sober. Like I have friends where I'm like, he's sober. You're like, wow, like that's kind of like guys you thought were just career drinkers, just gonna do it forever, and not even just drinking, but I mean, like, because that's the other side of it too, is it's not just drinking. People, because I've always said the drink bone's connected to the smoke bone, connected to and then people sort of go down in a full weekend warrior thing will happen where I'm like, bro, you're 55 years old. At some point that weekend is gonna end up with your family calling me on a Monday saying, so-and-so's in the hospital or worse. It's like, so to me, it's just kind of like, I think that, you eventually look at every rock and roll cliche and just think, I don't want to be that. I'm okay. I'll think I'll just be the one exception. Even as when I was younger, I was just like, why would anybody want to die at 27? It's like, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. I mean, I'm not saying that they are stupid for doing it. I just think that, it's like, it's just a really unfortunate way to kind of go out, like just flame on and then burn out real fast. Like I was like, no, I want to do this forever. I mean, this is what I want to do with my life. So that's a big part of it, is the longevity, the taking care of yourself, and hopefully we'll be having the same conversation in 20 years, which will be interesting.
Absolutely. You're going to look the same. I'll be much older.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that.
I'll finally, it's good. All right, man. Well, I appreciate the time on here, and being the first guest on this to talk about it. Again, we're doing this as a check-in for everybody that's like hey, we're just talking here. We're just talking about what it's like to tour this thing.
I think it's really interesting because it's funny because I don't really talk about this a lot. Like
Sure.
you run into people who drink, people who don't drink, and it's sort of like whatever. We coexist on the same planet, so we just kind of get on with it. But it's one thing to be attending meetings and all that kind of stuff. Like I have plenty of friends that do that too. It's like they do what they have to do to maintain. For me, it's just always been sort of like, I'm good. I don't eat meat. So it's sort of like, you choose these lanes and you just go, this is who I am.
Wait a minute.
You've gone too far, Todd.
You've gone too far. What are you doing? Anyway,
yeah, exactly.
To each their own. Whether you're vegan, it's like to each their own. This is the path that we chose. One of the things that you touched on was, that you're up there, you don't judge, and that's very important here.
It is.
I mean, to people to not judge us for not drinking, and also not to judge. You're there to help people and all the rest of it, and that's the point of this whole thing. Because I get a lot of people, especially since I've stopped over the last 3 years, asking me, how do you do it? Why did you do it? And I thought, okay, it's time to shed some light on it a little bit and go for it.
People just assume that you were like, full like meth head and like just, people just assume that you were like, you went into some serious dark areas or
it's like anything. You travel around, you run in concerts. So the first thing that people do is like, wow, what an amazing job. You must party all the time and know all the rock stars. Well, and and it's like, well, no. But it's late nights, and it's when I have friends that come out and kind of hang with me for half a day or something and see what kind of goes into it, they go, oh
no, I know, and that's the thing. I know what you do. I know how full on your life is. It's like if you're drinking during all that, then you probably are going to get clipped pretty fast because they need somebody who's. I mean, it's one thing to be like I said, the bass player who shows up and has a few drinks and goes plays a show. People in your position, that's a responsible adult needs to be handling this thing, or this machine does not move forward correctly. And what ends up happening is, and it happens all the time, is that guy that can't keep it together, he's replaced because, you can't have like
in every profession, not just mine.
Exactly.
In every profession, not just mine. So
yeah, it's the same as if someone shows up at the accounting firm hammered. Well, he's not going to be there very long. It's like that's not the way.
Especially when you're dealing with millions of dollars. But
no, exactly.
But I think the fact that you don't, and you're singing, and you're maintaining, and you're doing all the rest of it, I would go the other way with it. I would say that more people are looking at that, going, I think the stories of the hotel smashing and all the rest of it, people now are just like, huh, why? Why are you doing that? That's just coming out of your bottom line. Like, whereas,
that is true. Actually, young people today, that I think that everybody's so much more like, when I talk to young people, they're so much more conscious. And this too, living in an expensive town, that kids are like, I'm never going to be able to, I got to really crunch to own money and to retire and all that kind of stuff. So I think that, it is an interesting thing when someone says, when we did all kinds of shenanigans when we were young, and people kind of look at you like, well, why would you guys do that? It's like, that's really dumb that you guys broke those guitars. Weren't they perfectly good guitars? I go, they were perfectly good guitars.
Yeah,
but
yes, they were.
We were partying, and it got crazy, and and the lamp and the window.
Sebastian talks about that a bit, about getting handed a bill, and you're like, we gotta pay for this. We got to pay for all this smashing that we're doing. And it's like, it's easier to pay for it when the money's rolling in, but then, so.
Yeah. No one talks about that with Keith Moon from the Who trashing hotel rooms. They don't talk about the other side of that, which is, I always say, like, imagining being on the road with Keith Moon would be frustrating because at 3 a.m., probably nightly, they're like, yeah, dude, we got to change hotels. And what happened? Oh, Keith trashed. He drove a fucking car into the pool, and now we got to bail on this hotel and go to. I'm like, what? Like that's the reality of what Roger Daltrey or something like that, who's trying to be sober and sing well the next night, is like, are you serious? Like, and again, it's like, well, who's paying for this? Like, who's paying for the hotel room that he trashed? I'm not paying for that. Keith's paying for that. That whole thing is, and that's, it just doesn't make any sense.
Now. Especially
not now, no. Especially
these couches are expensive now.
Yeah. I don't know. They must have been giving them away back then.
That's back then. It was like there was no Leons back then. So, buddy, I appreciate the time. Tell everyone where they can find you and all that fun stuff on the internet's there. You know?
Yeah, I'm Todd Kearns on pretty much everything. Todd Dammit Kearns on Twitter, but Todd Kearns on the. I'm not a TikTok guy. Are you a TikTok guy?
I am. I did it to keep an eye on my daughter, and then I realized that
Well done.
just she's doing the thing, and I'm like, did you listen to the lyrics in that song? Well, no, but we made a fun video. It's like, yeah, that's got to go. So just like funny stuff. But then the grown-ups make the best. The grown-ups make the best shit on TikTok. And that's all I'm gonna say. The grown-ups
I've been meaning to do that. So you've kind of inspired me to be like, okay, well, maybe I should check that out. I honestly find it so overwhelming. People always tell me, you do such a good job on your social media. And I go, I honestly just answer questions and post things and sort of say hi. I don't really find myself out there kind of like, I don't know, influencing. I couldn't be bothered, but
it's a work. It's a pain in the ass. So having one of these shows, and it's a whole thing.
It's a full-time job. It is,
but it's fun, and I appreciate you making the time to come on here today, buddy. It's
100%
really
my pleasure.
And kicking this off. That's Todd Kerns. You can find him in all the places, and this has been the Brenton on Tour
except
podcast.
TikTok.
I don't know. By the time I put this out, you know what I mean. You could be on the TikTok. But you can have a look in Toque and Slash and some other probably surprises on the way, which is great. Make sure you check it out. Great guy, great guest. Thank you for coming back on the show. That's the Brenton on Tour podcast for another week. The Sober on Tour series continues next week with another guest. In the meantime, reach out. And thanks to my friends at Partake right there. Look at that. This is Partake. Look at those. Look at that crowd in that shot.
I haven't tried those.
This is a non-alcoholic beer. They're from Calgary. And Toronto, and it's fantastic. Yeah.
I gotta try it.
And so this is Partake. They sent me a bunch of stuff.
Great.
To talk about, if you're out there and you're doing it, and I know like the guys in Lamb of God like this stuff. They have their own non-alcoholic beer. Interesting, but anyways, thanks to them. Great guys for sending me some stuff, and I think it's appropriate with the crowd in the background there.
I like it. Tell them your friend Todd would like to try it.
No problem. You can probably get it down there. We'll see you next week, friends. Thanks, everybody.